right, so good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to round up today's session and touch a little bit upon how our senses can work to influence our food choices and maybe have a little impact on our mental health. Full disclaimer, I do interchange the words mental health, mood, and emotion a lot. I know we're technically not supposed to do that. You live and you learn, but just to let you know, I am going to do that a couple of times. Maybe not. Okay, I don't have much disclosures. As a postdoc, I am funded by the NIH through a T32 training grant, and I am employed by Monell Chemical Senses Center, so I am pretty biased, and I think that we all should care about the senses and the most important thing in the world, so. Okay, so when I was first asked to give this talk and discuss how sensory properties of food could really affect our mental health, I'm going to admit I was a little bit taken aback and nervous, because while my background was really in taste preferences and using taste to help guide food preferences to then influence behavior change and help people adopt healthier eating habits, I saw some mental health outcomes in terms of reduced stress from adopting those behaviors. But when I was in the literature back in a dissertation period, I really didn't come across anything that directly linked our sensory properties of food to actually our mental health. But as a scientist, I like a challenge, and I really like to find different connections to things. So I really wanted to frame today's talk in a way where I was introducing the field of sensory science and how it impacts our food and nutrition choices, and then sort of creating a story or a framework we can follow that can help us introduce or cultivate different ways that we can apply what we learned and how it can hopefully influence our mental health, mood, and emotion, things like that. So when I first started my research or my little journey in terms of preparing this talk, I dove a little bit in the literature to see what was out there. Is there really a connection between these sensory properties of food and our mood or our mental health? And I came across this article which does tell us that our emotions can influence our food choice, which I think we all know. When we're in a certain type of mood, or we're feeling sad, or we're feeling mad, or we're aggravated or something, we tend to gravitate towards food and select certain foods that make us feel good. So the authors did touch on the sensory aspect within this, and they found what I already kind of pretty much knew, is that we do have this sensory reward from food, and this is accomplished through different neurotransmitter systems. So whether we eat a certain food and we have gabapentin or dopamine, something's going off in our brain, and that in turn is then driving our hedonic evaluation of the food. So how pleasurable we find the food. Do we like the food? Do we dislike the food? But we really mainly see this in sweet foods, fatty foods, and those palatable foods. For example, sweet was a really big thing we talked about yesterday. We do know that sweet can influence our mood. When we are angry, when we are sad, we tend to gravitate and get those sweet foods, and they give us this temporary feeling of feeling a little bit better, and we get happy. We know, as in the sensory world, that the sensory appeal of foods is really what's guiding our food choices. So in this one study of about 500 consumers, they asked them what types of things they look at when they're trying to figure out what they're going to purchase at the store. And they found that the taste, the appearance, the smell, and the texture of food were really what the factors were influencing their desire to purchase, consume, and their overall satisfaction of the food. We also know that sensory properties of food play important roles in terms of guiding our food behaviors. So by sensory properties of food, what I'm referring to is the visual, so our sight, how we see the food, the taste of the food, the smell, the touch, the hearing a little bit. I don't know about you guys, my food doesn't talk to me all the time, sometimes, but yeah. But all of those things can actually then influence what foods that we decide to eat and how we choose. So whether this be through our liking of the foods, or do we prefer these foods, do we not prefer these foods, or the actual functional role in how these foods play a role in what we eat. So we can see this in two ways, this functional role. There's one way in terms of our vision and smell. This really seems to work before we have the food, so in the anticipation of the food. So imagine you are walking past a pizza shop, or you're at the movie theater and you smell the popcorn, or maybe there's a fresh cut salad or some watermelon or something that's in front of you. You may have not been thinking about that food before, but upon seeing that food and smelling that food, you may be like, oh yeah, I want that food. And that's those senses kind of playing the role. Then we have our other senses, our hearing, our taste, our texture, the touch of the food. We really find that works during the consumption of the food. So it can really help to determine how satiated we feel. It can help moderate our energy intake. And all of our senses work together to now create this dynamic perception of food that then in turn influences our liking and our consumption behaviors.